Wendy walked into the courtroom, the weight of decades of secrets pressing down on her like a storm about to break. The air was thick with anticipation, reporters clustered near the benches, cameras flashing intermittently, capturing every step she took. Her fingers gripped a thick folder, filled with documents, testimonies, and evidence that could topple empires. Today was the day she would speak truths long buried under a shroud of silence and fear. It hadn't been easy to get here. From the very moment Wendy began digging into the hidden corners of the entertainment industry, she faced a barrage of subtle warnings and veiled threats. A cryptic message had landed on her phone weeks earlier: stop now, or lose everything. But Wendy had never been one to back down. This was more than a story, it was a mission to protect the voices crushed by power and intimidation. She remembered her early days, fresh out of journalism school, eager and idealistic, stepping into a world where glamour masked cruelty. Covering entertainment wasn't just about the glitz and the glam, it was about unraveling stories no one dared to tell. Wendy quickly learned that the executives running the show preferred shadows to sunlight. Whenever she attempted to report on controversial figures like Diddy, a subtle pushback followed: closed doors, lost access, whispered warnings. But the warnings escalated. The industry wasn't merely defensive, it was aggressive. Wendy was isolated, friends wary of being caught in the crossfire began to pull away. Every phone call, every meeting was tinged with the knowledge that someone was watching. The threats became more explicit, the stakes higher. Yet, the fire inside Wendy burned brighter. She gathered evidence relentlessly: documents, confidential agreements, recorded conversations. The folder she carried wasn't just paper, it was the armor she wore into the battlefield. And today, she was ready. The courtroom doors opened. Wendy took a deep breath and stepped inside. The judge's eyes met hers with a grave seriousness, acknowledging the gravity of what was to come. Cameras captured every second, the public hungry for the truths about to be revealed. Wendy began recounting her journey. The subtle intimidation by executives, the veiled threats by powerful men like Diddy, the personal toll exacted by speaking out. She spoke of Cassie, a young woman trapped in a gilded cage, isolated and controlled under the veneer of luxury. Wendy described the lavish parties where attendees signed non-disclosure agreements that masked darker rituals, forced participation, coercion, and trauma hidden behind closed doors. Her testimony unveiled a network of silence carefully maintained by fear and influence. She detailed how challenging industry giants like Oprah and Tyler Perry had resulted in professional blacklisting and sponsorship withdrawals. The courtroom grew tense as Wendy revealed documents proving systemic retaliation against those who dared question the powerful. But the battle wasn't just in the public eye. Wendy spoke candidly about the emotional and psychological toll, the loneliness, the betrayal, the constant fear. She recalled being ambushed, both physically and emotionally, a stark symbol of the dangers faced by whistleblowers in Hollywood. Despite the attacks, Wendy's resolve remained unbroken. She urged the court and the public to recognize the machinery of silence and to empower victims to break free. She shared her belief that silence only enabled darkness to spread. As the day drew to a close, Wendy's eyes locked with those in the courtroom. She knew the road ahead was long and fraught with danger, but the truth had finally found a voice. An anonymous informant's warning echoed in her mind: the revelations were just beginning. And Wendy was ready to face whatever came next. Wendy stepped deeper into the courtroom, the heavy folder clutched firmly in her hands acting as both shield and sword. Each step echoed softly against the marble floor, but inside her mind, a storm was raging, memories of years spent fighting shadows and secrets, threats whispered behind closed doors, and the faces of those who had been silenced. Her journey to this moment had been anything but smooth. Early on, her investigations into the darker side of Hollywood had drawn subtle but unmistakable warnings. Executives who once smiled at her calls began to disappear, and sources grew fearful, their voices barely above a whisper. But the real danger came from the top, men like Diddy, whose name carried power and influence that extended beyond the glittering facades of parties and award shows. Wendy recalled the chilling text that arrived late one night, its words cold and clear: stop now, or you'll lose everything. But instead of stepping back, Wendy dug deeper. She knew that behind every threat was a story waiting to be told, stories of manipulation, control, and pain masked by luxury and fame. She had witnessed firsthand the way Cassie, a rising starlet, was controlled by Diddy's iron grip, isolated from friends and family, her every move orchestrated within a bubble of excess and confinement. Wendy's investigation uncovered the disturbing rituals that took place behind the scenes, parties where silence was bought with NDAs, where participation was coerced, and trauma swept under the rug. In the courtroom, Wendy described these horrors with steady determination, painting a picture of an industry that thrived on silence and fear. She revealed how questioning powerful figures like Oprah and Tyler Perry's projects had resulted in immediate professional exile, sponsorships withdrawn, doors slammed shut. Opposing counsel tried to shake her confidence, challenging every word, but Wendy held firm, presenting documents and testimonies that forced even skeptics to pause. The weight of truth was undeniable. As she spoke, memories of betrayal and loneliness surfaced, the friends who turned away, the ever-present surveillance, the emotional toll of standing alone against giants. But these hardships only strengthened her resolve. Before the day ended, an anonymous contact handed her a confidential document, a key that promised to unlock even darker secrets. Wendy knew this fight was far from over. The courtroom buzzed with tension and anticipation. The storm had begun to break. Wendy paused for a moment outside the courtroom after the session ended, the weight of the folder pressing hard against her palms. She glanced around discreetly, feeling eyes linger, some curious, others hostile. The stakes were higher than ever. This was more than a legal battle, it was a fight for the truth, for the silenced voices trapped beneath decades of power and intimidation. Backstage, Wendy's mind raced as she reviewed the timeline of events that had led her here. From her first whispered warnings to the overt attempts to derail her career, every moment was a thread in a larger tapestry of systemic abuse and fear. She thought of the women who had confided in her, their stories of trauma hidden beneath a glittering surface that few ever glimpsed. Her testimony had only scratched the surface. The documents she'd collected were just the beginning. There were more secrets locked away in confidential agreements, more victims afraid to speak. Wendy knew that the path ahead would be dangerous, filled with attempts to silence and discredit her. Yet, the growing support from unexpected quarters fueled her courage. Quiet allies within the industry, survivors inspired by her bravery, and an awakening public sentiment all signaled that change might finally be possible. As she prepared for the next day, Wendy reflected on the journey, the sacrifices, the betrayals, and the moments of hope that had kept her going. She wasn't just telling a story, she was lighting a beacon for those trapped in darkness. The courtroom doors had opened a crack, and Wendy was determined to widen that opening, no matter the cost. The courtroom buzzed with anticipation, every seat filled with a mix of reporters, lawyers, and spectators eager to witness the unfolding drama. As Wendy took the stand, the weight of years of secrets and threats seemed to settle around her like a suffocating cloak. Yet, her eyes burned with determination, a fierce resolve to finally expose the dark underbelly of an industry built on glamour but fueled by silence. Wendy began by recounting the subtle, yet relentless pressure she faced from Diddy. It wasn't just about rumors or idle gossip, it was a carefully orchestrated campaign to isolate those he controlled, starting with Cassie. Wendy detailed how Cassie was surrounded by luxury yet trapped in a gilded cage, every movement watched, every friend pushed away. The lavish parties that seemed like dreamlike escapes were, in truth, carefully managed events where silence was bought with non-disclosure agreements and where refusal meant social exile or worse. As Wendy described these harrowing accounts, the courtroom grew heavy with the weight of the unspoken truths. She spoke of party rituals that involved coercion, the emotional scars left on those forced to participate, and the mechanisms of fear that kept victims from speaking out. It was a world where power ruled with an iron fist hidden beneath velvet gloves. But the fight wasn't just external. Wendy revealed the internal battles, the loneliness, the betrayal of friends who distanced themselves, and the ever-present threat of being watched. She shared how her advocacy came at a personal cost, strained relationships, nights filled with fear, and the constant pressure to remain vigilant. Opposing lawyers tried to undermine her testimony with aggressive questioning, attempting to paint her as unstable or biased. But Wendy stood firm, presenting confidential documents, NDAs, recorded conversations, and first-hand testimonies that corroborated her words. The evidence was undeniable, forcing even the harshest skeptics in the room to reconsider. Supporters began to emerge quietly, emboldened by Wendy's courage. Whispers of solidarity echoed beyond the courtroom walls as more survivors found the strength to come forward. The tide was slowly turning. Yet, the darkness still lingered. Wendy disclosed a confidential audio recording that surfaced unexpectedly, hinting at deeper corruption reaching higher than anyone had imagined. It was a chilling reminder that the fight for truth was far from over. As the session drew to a close, Wendy's resolve only grew stronger. She knew the path ahead was treacherous, but with each revelation, the walls of silence cracked a little more. The truth was finding its voice, and Wendy was determined to be its champion. The courtroom lights felt harsh against Wendy's eyes as she took a steadying breath. The weight of every gaze was palpable, yet she refused to falter. The journey that brought her here was marked by moments most wouldn't dare to recount, moments where courage collided with danger in the darkest corners of Hollywood. Wendy's voice trembled slightly as she began, "When I first raised questions about Oprah Winfrey and Tyler Perry's film Precious, I didn't realize how high the cost would be." She paused, eyes scanning the courtroom. What seemed like honest inquiry turned into a professional exile. She detailed how immediately after her critiques, sponsorships dried up overnight. Invitations to exclusive events vanished as if erased by a collective will. Friends and colleagues became distant shadows, afraid to be seen with someone challenging the industry's most revered figures. The room was silent, every person absorbing the gravity of her words. Wendy continued, "It wasn't just about lost opportunities, it was about being erased." Her voice grew firmer. "Like my very presence was a threat to the carefully curated image of those in power." The backlash only intensified when Wendy questioned Jay-Z's relationship with Foxy Brown. It was as if a line had been crossed, triggering a swift and ruthless response. "Sponsorships that once supported my work disappeared overnight," Wendy explained, her voice edged with frustration. "Doors slammed shut, and an unspoken blacklist seemed to shadow my every step." She described how the entertainment industry's protective walls closed in, making it nearly impossible to find allies. People who once offered support turned cold, either out of fear or loyalty, she said, her eyes betraying the loneliness she endured. "I was left navigating a minefield, where every step could trigger another explosion." Wendy's story wasn't just about professional consequences. She shared a terrifying account of being ambushed by Total, an incident that shook her to her core and underscored the physical dangers of speaking out. The ambush wasn't random, it was a calculated message meant to silence. "The ambush by Total was a stark reminder," Wendy said softly, her voice catching. "That standing up to powerful figures isn't just a risk to your career, it's a risk to your safety." She recounted the moment vividly, the sudden confrontation in a dimly lit alley, the surge of adrenaline, the whispered threats that lingered long after the encounter. The emotional toll of such moments was immense. Wendy opened up about the strain on her personal relationships, how constant surveillance and fear seeped into every aspect of her life. "Trust became a luxury I couldn't afford," she admitted. "I had to learn to be guarded, always looking over my shoulder." Yet, even as the weight pressed down, Wendy refused to retreat. She courageously disclosed documents that detailed a systematic campaign to silence and retaliate against whistleblowers. The courtroom was hushed as she laid out the evidence, signed NDAs, recorded conversations, and internal memos that exposed a machinery of control. The courtroom seemed to hold its breath as Wendy revealed the depth of the corruption. "These documents aren't just paper, they're proof," she declared, her voice steady despite the heaviness of the moment. "Proof that those in power went to great lengths to maintain silence and control, at any cost." She detailed how these tactics extended beyond individual retaliation, forming a network designed to suppress truth across the industry. It's a culture built on fear, where victims and whistleblowers are isolated and discredited. As she spoke, a shift began to ripple through the courtroom. Media outlets started to question previous narratives, public opinion wavered, and whispers of accountability grew louder. Survivors, inspired by Wendy's bravery, began to find their own voices. But even as hope flickered, the fight remained perilous. Wendy described the constant pressure, both overt and covert, to back down, to silence herself for the greater good of the industry. Wendy's eyes scanned the room as she recounted how public opinion had become a double-edged sword. There were those who hailed me as a hero, but others questioned my motives, painted me as unstable or driven by personal vendettas, she explained. The polarization was exhausting. She spoke about the isolation that came with standing in the eye of such a storm. It was a lonely battle. Friends disappeared, alliances shattered, and trust became a precious commodity. Yet, amid the turmoil, a breakthrough came. A critical witness stepped forward, their testimony corroborating Wendy's revelations and exposing new layers of corruption. The courtroom buzzed with a mix of disbelief and validation. Wendy's resolve strengthened, knowing that the truth was beginning to pierce through the walls of silence. But the stakes had never been higher. The courtroom's atmosphere grew tense as Wendy recounted the sudden threat that had sent shockwaves through the case. A close ally, someone I trusted, betrayed me in the worst way, she revealed, voice heavy with the weight of betrayal. It was a stark reminder that in this fight, even the closest can turn away. Despite the pain, Wendy's determination remained unbroken. She concluded her testimony with a solemn vow, I will continue to fight, not just for myself, but for every voice silenced by fear and power. The courtroom remained silent, the gravity of her words settling over everyone present. Outside, the world awaited the next chapter in a battle far from over. The courtroom was thick with tension as Wendy stepped forward to unveil another layer of Hollywood's darkest secrets. The glamour that masked the industry's elite had always been a dazzling facade, but beneath it lay a chilling reality, a world where control and manipulation reigned supreme. Wendy's voice was steady, unwavering as she described Diddy's controlling behavior over Cassie. What the public saw was luxury, fame, and success, she said, but behind closed doors, Cassie's every move was orchestrated. She was isolated from friends, family, and anyone who might offer her support. She detailed the lavish parties that appeared as celebrations but were, in truth, carefully managed events where attendees were bound by strict non-disclosure agreements. Refusal to participate wasn't an option, it came with consequences, Wendy explained. Many left feeling hollow, their trauma masked by the bright lights. Wendy went deeper into the disturbing rituals that took place during these so-called parties. She described how power was wielded not just through money or fame, but through fear and coercion. There were unspoken rules, she explained, and breaking them meant risking everything, your career, your reputation, even your safety. She recounted accounts from survivors who described feeling trapped in a gilded cage, their voices silenced by a network of intimidation and cover-ups. These were not isolated incidents, Wendy emphasized, but part of a systemic problem that protected the powerful at the expense of the vulnerable. The courtroom listened intently as Wendy presented confidential documents and testimonies that exposed this machinery of silence. The impact was palpable, even those long accustomed to the industry's secrets were visibly shaken. As Wendy's testimony unfolded, the courtroom's atmosphere shifted. What had once been whispered rumors now stood revealed in stark detail. She spoke of the relentless campaign by industry allies to discredit her, how powerful figures mobilized to isolate and intimidate her. I was painted as the antagonist, Wendy said, her voice firm but weary. But the truth cannot be silenced forever. She described the emotional and psychological toll this battle took. The isolation, the sleepless nights, and the constant vigilance required to navigate a world where trust was scarce. Despite the mounting pressure, Wendy remained undeterred. She presented new evidence, confidential memos, recorded conversations, that forced even skeptics to acknowledge the systemic abuse within Hollywood. As the evidence unfolded, a quiet revolution began. Victims who had long suffered in silence found courage in Wendy's words. I started receiving messages from survivors, she shared, people who finally felt safe enough to speak out. Wendy reflected on the personal sacrifices she had made, but reaffirmed her commitment. This fight is bigger than me. It's about breaking cycles of abuse and giving power back to the voiceless. Yet, even as hope grew, Wendy warned the courtroom of the challenges ahead. The forces protecting the status quo were strong and relentless, determined to maintain control. A shocking revelation about a major industry figure's involvement rocked the courtroom, signaling that the story was far from over. Wendy's voice softened as she spoke of the emotional toll, lost friendships, fractured family ties, and the loneliness that settled like a shadow. The personal cost has been immense, she admitted. But so has the resolve to see justice done. She recounted moments of doubt and fear but emphasized the strength found in solidarity with survivors who now stood beside her. Their stories are my strength, Wendy said, eyes shining with determination. The courtroom felt the weight of her journey, the sacrifices made not just by Wendy but by countless others silenced by fear and power. As Wendy concluded her testimony for the day, she looked around the courtroom with quiet determination. This is not just a personal fight, she said. It is a call to action, a demand that the industry reckon with its darkest truths. The courtroom sat in solemn silence, the impact of her words settling deeply. Outside, whispers of change stirred in the media and among the public. Yet Wendy knew this was only the beginning. As she stepped down from the stand, a new challenge awaited, one that would test her resolve and courage like never before. Behind every glamorous smile and red carpet appearance, Wendy explained, lay stories of pain and silence. The industry's sparkle often masks deep wounds, she said, her voice steady but filled with sorrow. She recounted personal trauma she had witnessed and experienced firsthand while advocating for victims. Nights filled with anxiety, moments of heartbreak, and the crushing weight of constant threats were part of her reality. Wendy's words painted a vivid picture of the emotional battlefield she navigated daily, a landscape scarred by betrayal, fear, and hope. Wendy described how the constant threat of surveillance and betrayal infiltrated every aspect of her life. It wasn't just about what I said or did publicly, she explained, it was the fear that someone was always watching, waiting for me to slip. She detailed how this pressure strained relationships, turning friends into distant acquaintances and loved ones into worried onlookers. The emotional isolation was profound, yet Wendy refused to be silenced. Through it all, she remained focused on the larger goal, giving a voice to the voiceless and shattering the culture of fear that pervaded Hollywood. Wendy unveiled additional confidential documents that exposed a widespread use of NDAs and silencing tactics across Hollywood. These agreements were more than legal tools, she explained. They were weapons used to enforce silence and protect abusers. She recounted stories of survivors who felt trapped by these contracts, unable to speak without risking devastating consequences. The documents painted a chilling picture of systemic suppression. The courtroom grew solemn as Wendy laid bare the extent of the industry's machinery of silence, emphasizing the urgent need for change. Public opinion began to polarize as Wendy's revelations spread. Some hailed me as a hero, she acknowledged, while others questioned my motives, casting doubt and suspicion. She discussed the exhausting battle of navigating such division, where support and skepticism existed side by side. It was a test of resilience, Wendy said, and a reminder that truth often disrupts comfort. Despite the challenges, momentum built. Survivors found strength in her courage, and conversations about accountability gained traction. A critical witness came forward, corroborating Wendy's testimony and exposing new layers of corruption. Their courage to speak up was a turning point, Wendy said, her voice steady with resolve. The courtroom felt the gravity of this breakthrough, a testament to the power of collective voices rising against oppression. Yet Wendy knew the fight was far from over. She prepared to face new challenges with the unwavering commitment that had carried her this far. As Wendy's testimony drew to a close, she reflected on the unexpected betrayal that had threatened to unravel everything. Someone I trusted turned their back, she admitted, pain evident in her eyes. But betrayal only strengthened my resolve. She ended with a powerful vow, this fight belongs to all of us. I will not stop until justice is served and the voices of the silenced are heard. The courtroom was silent, the weight of her words settling deeply as everyone recognized the enormity of the battle ahead. The final act was set. The courtroom was charged with a mix of anticipation and solemnity as Wendy prepared to deliver her closing testimony. This was more than a legal proceeding, it was a reckoning, a demand for truth and justice from an industry long cloaked in silence. Wendy's voice was clear and passionate as she addressed the court. Today, I ask you not just to hear my words, but to listen, to truly listen, to the stories behind the headlines. She recounted the cumulative consequences faced by victims and whistleblowers alike, illustrating the high stakes of the battle they fought. This is a fight against a system designed to protect itself at any cost. Wendy called on survivors to unite, emphasizing the power of collective voices in dismantling oppressive systems. We are stronger together, she urged. When we stand united, no force can silence us. She highlighted stories of courage and resilience, reminding the courtroom that behind every statistic was a human being with a story deserving to be heard and believed. The courtroom's energy shifted as Wendy's words ignited a spark of hope and determination. The defense lawyers mounted a last-ditch effort to undermine Wendy's credibility and the evidence she presented. The courtroom grew tense as they questioned her motives, her sources, and even her character. Wendy remained composed, answering with clarity and conviction. Her testimony was bolstered by the weight of documented evidence and corroborating witness accounts. The battle was fierce, but Wendy's determination never wavered. In a dramatic courtroom moment, Wendy unveiled a damning piece of evidence that turned the tide definitively in her favor. The room fell silent as the judge and jury absorbed the revelation, a confidential document exposing a deep cover-up within the industry. This pivotal moment marked a turning point, shifting the momentum toward justice and accountability. The courtroom and public reacted strongly to the verdict that followed. Media outlets buzzed with headlines calling for change, and conversations about Hollywood's culture shifted. Wendy reflected on the collective power that had driven this transformation, emphasizing that it was just the beginning. Her fight, and that of countless others, had opened a door, one that could no longer be closed. As Wendy stepped out of the courtroom, she knew the fight was far from over. New challenges loomed on the horizon, threats, scrutiny, and the constant battle to keep the truth alive. But Wendy's spirit was unbroken. She was ready to face whatever came next, fueled by the belief that speaking out could change not only her story but the industry as a whole. The journey ahead was uncertain, but for the first time in a long time, there was hope.